Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 6, verse 9. I think this is one of the more interesting psukim, maybe in Chumash, I don't know. We just to give context, the last week's parsha ended off with Paro reacting very negatively to Moshe and Aaron and actually increasing the burden upon the Jewish people. And the people come back to Moshe and they complain, well, you messed us up. And then Moshe turns to Hashem and says, why have you done so bad to this nation? Why have you sent me to do this mission of doing bad to the nation? And Hashem speaks strongly to Moshe. We had a lot of discussion yesterday, various ideas in the Mefarshim as to what the message Hashem conveyed to Moshe was, but inspiring messages, whatever the pshat is. And then he says, and go tell Bnei Israel. Go tell Bnei Israel. So for example, one of the pshats that we said yesterday, God says there's going to be miracles that totally define nature, that there haven't been such things before. Go tell Bnei Israel that that's what's going to happen. And I'm going to take them out of Egypt. Verse 9. So Moshe's in. Moshe's ready. Vaydaber Moshe keno Bnei Israel. Moshe said this to the Jewish people. V'lo shamua Moshe. They didn't listen. They had originally accepted Moshe's mission, but now they don't listen. Why? Mikotze ruach u'me'avodah kasha. Kotze ruach literally means maybe shortness of breath, narrowness of spirit, something like that. And because of the hard work that they were put through. So this is I think, a very important question. What was it about their situation and circumstance that they couldn't process that which they so quickly accepted in last week's parsha? Okay, so let's see the Ramban. Ramban on Pasuk Tes. Mikotze ruach me'avodah kasha. Lo ba'avur shelo yaminu b'Hashem u'b'neviyo. Clarifies the Ramban. It's not that they weren't interested in believing in God, or they weren't interested in believing in Moshe. This wasn't a theological issue. Rak shelo hitu ozen l'dvarav mikotze ruach. They couldn't turn their ear to his words out of a shortness of spirit. Ka'adam shetiktzar nafsho b'amol. The Ramban says, imagine a person who is just beside themselves in work. They don't want to live anymore. It's so painful for them. It's so hard to keep on living. It's just difficult. And they're under such duress. Even though they intellectually understand that it will be better down the road. If they only, if you just climb that hill, if you get to the top of the hill, it'll be so much better once you get there. They just can't bring themselves to do it. The Ramban says that's the image. The Kotze Ruach, what exactly was the source of their lack of ability to sort of dream beyond? Hu pachtam shlo yahargim paro b'cherev. So Ramban says they were living in constant fear that maybe Paro would kill them. Kasher amru shotrehem Moshe, like the officers conveyed to Moshe in last week's parsha. So they were living in constant fear that if they did the wrong thing, said the wrong thing, didn't work hard enough, they'd be killed by the Egyptians. That was one part of it. That wasn't all of it. There was one factor. Vavodah kasha, and the hard work. Hu hadochek, that's the duress. Shayohanoksim otzim bahem, that the taskmasters were pressing them very hard. V'lo yitnu lishma davar v'lachshav bo, and they didn't have the ability to think about something, hear something and think about it. So these are two components. Living with abject fear, at any moment something terrible will happen to them, and the inability, because of their circumstances, to stop and listen and reflect. That's how the Ramban explains the pasuk. Okay, let's see the Or HaChaim. Or HaChaim pasuk. I was actually discussing this with another group in another context last night. And it was interesting. So somebody was asking, like, so are they being criticized for this? I don't think they're being criticized. I don't think that's the pshat. I think the pshat is, again, is it possible they could have done better? Yeah, it's possible they could have done better, but I think we're giving a very reasonable explanation that it was just so difficult for them to see beyond. Or HaChaim pasuk tes mikotze ruach ulai ki letzad shlo hayu b'nei Torah lo shamu. Maybe, says the Or HaChaim, because they were not yet connected to the Torah, they weren't able to process what Moshe was saying to them. Really, really interesting idea. The Ohr HaChaim suggests that the Torah, the study of Torah, the connection to Torah, has such a remarkable impact on a person, broadens a person's spirit. What we would say is expands a person's horizons, but it's more than just intellectual. It's intellectual, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's everything. A person becomes a different person from connection to Torah. So says the Ohr HaChaim, maybe we're saying it really wasn't their fault. Maybe they couldn't process this because they didn't yet have the blessing of Torah in their lives. It's an interesting thing to think about as well. Going further in the Ohr HaChaim, Umiavodah kashan, from hard work. Tam omra umiavodah, the reason it says and from hard work, say Yagid, kimuvad sar avodah, od hayolam kotzer ruach. So Ohr HaChaim says, what you see from this pasuk is, see, if it would have just said in the pasuk that they were really, they had a narrow spirit, you'd have said, oh, I bet it's because of their slavery. So the Ohr HaChaim says what's conveying in the pasuk is they had this separate issue, separate from the fact that they were working so hard. There was a narrowness of spirit for them. Vatam birosam kama kavdolem hamalacha katzra nafsham. When they saw how heavy the work was upon them, they just lost their spirit. Novad prat saru avoda. So interesting to think about. It says the Ohr HaChaim, avodah kasha, the hard work, means the physical duress that they were under, and that's very significant. But kotzer ruach means the dejection of spirit because they had such hard work. So sort of like body and soul, like we would say, body and soul were both just totally crushed. V'gam derech ha'isha shetiktzar nafsho lo yuchal lavod, a person whose spirits are dejected isn't able to work. Ki echalesh l'machovo v'roim heimashnayim. So you could have a person who is physically well, but because he's under so much distress, he's like physically unable to work. In other words, it's psychosomatic, if I'm getting the right word. In other words, but the person's so dejected, they like feel pains and things like that. So the Ohr HaChaim says, so imagine if the pains are absolutely real. Imagine if the person physically was at their absolute limit and they felt terribly dejected. It's two separate points. Od, the fact that the Jewish people were told about the redemption, their hearts broadened, they were alive. That's the last point the Ohr HaChaim makes. It's very, very interesting. Ohr HaChaim says, their hearts were flying in last week's parsha when Moshe Rabbeinu came to them. This is what they had been waiting for all of this time. And then their dreams crashed because they thought it was going to be like tomorrow we were leaving. And Paro tells them, no, you're working harder because this is preposterous what you're talking about. And so now, says Ohr HaChaim, it's like like we always, don't get your hopes up. We realize that in our own interactions with people. And so they were living the dream that they had always been waiting for, and then it crashed. So Ohr HaChaim says, so now they have no ability to think, to aspire, to dream, to hope. They're crushed. So kind of depressing, but I think interesting or illuminating maybe in its own way. Okay. Now we go to verse 14, and the Torah very, very interestingly interjects with the whole story of so basically Moshe comes back to Hashem and says, they didn't buy it. And Hashem basically says, yeah, keep on plugging. I mean, those are my own words, but that's more or less what Hashem says to him. Keep on trying, basically. And now, all of a sudden, in verse 14, these are the families of the Jewish people. Reuven, these are Reuven's children. Verse 15, Shimon, These are Shimon's children. Verse 16. These are the names of the sons of Levi. Gershon, Kohath, Merari. This is the years of Levi. These are the years of Levi's life. It didn't say the years of Reuven's or Shimon's lives. It says the years of Levi's life. Now, whereas for Reuven and Shimon, we just discussed the children of Reuven and Shimon, we now get into the grandchildren of Levi. And then when we get to verse 18, Uvnei Kohath Amram b'Yitzhar, we mentioned Amram as a grandson of Levi. Now in 18, we say the age of the years of Kohath in this world, okay? And then we go on to verse 20, Amram married Yocheved, his cousin, his aunt, depends how you understand the pasuk, as a wife, and she bore Aaron and Moshe, and these are the years that Amram lived for. By the way, we mentioned verse 23 that Aaron married, whom Aaron married, Elishama bas Aminadav, and we say the children of Aaron. We didn't mention the children of Moshe, by the way. We go through the rest of the family of the extended family of Levi, like down to that generation of Aaron and Moshe and the other branches of the family. And now we're done. Now back to our regularly scheduled program of what was going on in Egypt. There are so many questions that are obvious in this parsha. First and foremost, why in the world are we going through the lineage here? Question number one. Question number two, it's not a complete lineage. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and then we were done. Question number three, Levi is given much more detail than Reuven and Shimon. Question number four, we go through the years of Levi, Kohath, and Amram. We didn't even do that in general for the family of Levi, just this line going up to Moshe and Aaron. Question number five, we mentioned certain spouses in here, certain women that they married. It's very difficult to understand who's mentioned, who's not. By the way, Moshe's wife is not mentioned in this. Aaron's wife is mentioned. Question number six, we mentioned the children of Aaron. We don't mention the children of Moshe. Now, obviously, a lot of these answers are interconnected, as I'm sure you can imagine. But there's a lot of questions here. Let's just get started with the Ramban. We'll at least get our feet wet, and then we'll continue tomorrow, God willing. Ramban on Pasuk Yud Daled. Eila Roshei V'Savosam. Lo Rotza Akasuv Lahaschil Eila Shmos B'nei Levi L'Sodosam. So first of all, the Ramban clarifies this is totally about the family of Levi, because we're talking about Moshe and Aaron. But it wasn't nice to just start with Levi. Because that would imply that from here on out, since Moshe, the leader, is from the tribe of Levi, Levi is considered the first of the tribes, which is not true. In other words, so if you went just to Levi, it would have given that implication. So when we mention, if we're going to mention the lineage of the family of Levi, it's menshlich to first start with Reuven and Shimon, to clarify that the tribe of Levi has the same status within the broader family as it did before. And Levi's status doesn't change because of Moshe's rise to prominence. And he's counted third. And we mentioned the different generations of Levi. Reuven and Shimon, we only mentioned the names of the people who went down to Egypt. Levi Yaskir Toldosav, Ushnosav, V'toldos Avos Anavim, Ushnosam Lichvodam. And for Levi, we mentioned generations of his family, 3 generations down, so that we can get to Moshe and Aaron. And we can explain the line of how it goes to Moshe and Aaron. And also because they were people like from an earlier time. They were of a similar prominence to people in the earlier generation. So just to sum up, we spoke this morning about the Ramban and Orach Chaim in terms of why the Jewish people couldn't process what Moshe was saying to them. And now we said the Ramban, we answered some of our questions. We explained why we stopped after going through Levi. We explained why we mentioned Reuven and Shimon. We explained why we mentioned more of the family tree for Levi than for the other 2 tribes. But there's still many, many questions. Come back tomorrow for that. Let's see.